In this update, we've got two shots of cooler air that looks to head southbound over the course of the next 7 days, plus an area of disturbed weather that looks to make it into the southern Gulf of Mexico by early next week. So let's take a look at the big picture this morning on the North American view. This is your temperature anomaly map, and you can see kind of a sharp gradient where all the red is. That is your above and well above average temperatures. So if you live west of this line, you're in the heat, you're baking in the Four Corners regions, especially for that area into Phoenix. They actually hit 100 degrees for the 100th consecutive day out there, and no end in sight with that heat as it continues to build out west into California, much of the northwestern regions. But out into the central and eastern 2/3, it's almost completely the opposite with that cooler shot of air. And that cooler shot of air brought a cool front, at least the first cool front, all the way down into the deep south, and actually spread some beneficial rains for those parts of areas into Texas. But it also left behind some drier air back behind it. That's separated by this area in brown here. That is indicative of some drier air, and that's one of the reasons why you're actually cooling off in a big way for those areas across the Ohio Valley. But if you're in the green shaded area, that's where the most moist and more unstable conditions are. That's what brought all the beneficial rains, an area of low pressure that spun off yesterday out there in West Texas that dumped a heavy coating. I mean, some of these areas actually picked up 5 inches, if not more. If you live out there west of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, down out there in portions of West Texas, some definitely beneficial rains for them. And then even to the south, we had a disturbed weather down there in Galveston. They also picked up around 5 inches on your Labor Day. But you can see where the cool front is, right? It's still producing some very active weather with this little non-tropical low that's just kind of right off the coast. So if you live along these coastal regions, you're definitely getting some heavier rains within this area. But back behind it, you can see that high pressure. That's indicative with that drier air mass. And then the other pocket of energy is just west of the Denver region, back into Cheyenne, as well as into the Rapid City area. But if we expand the view and kind of take a look at the big picture headed into tomorrow, that heat dome doesn't go anywhere. It actually expands for those areas out west. We're already looking at a little bit of another dip in the upper levels of the atmosphere. That's going to bring another trough down, and that's going to be the start of yet a second, more reinforcing shot of cooler air that promises to drift into the Ohio Valley and much of the Northeast. And that also looks to be heading southbound and actually end up well to the south as well. So if we look on the satellite picture on Thursday, two things that stand out is, yes, that little area of disturbed weather that's just hanging out right off the coast off of Texas. It's still bringing some heavier rains just right on the extreme portions of the coastline there. So if you live along that region, you're definitely feeling it in a big way, and it's spreading some of its precipitation into portions of the southeast. And here's the beginning stages of that second reinforcing shot of cooler air that's entering portions of Canada, that drops down into Minnesota, and that sharp gradient of where those temperatures drop back behind it. It's going to be ringing out some sporadic showers and thunderstorms along that cool front. So if you break it down over the next 48 hours, it kind of looks like this. So that obviously the heavier precipitation is right along this boundary where that little non-tropical low is sitting out there, down there into the Gulf of Mexico. So right into those areas across I-10, I-20, that's where you're likely going to be getting the heaviest rains over the course of the next 2 days, and especially there into Florida. So you still get inundated with scattered to moderate, showers and thunderstorms. And then, of course, further to the north, right along that boundary where the cool front is, it's going to be ringing out some precipitation. And then whatever's left from that low pressure center that left all the heavier rains out in West Texas, it's starting to wind down. So those areas are going to be drying out after today. So if you look at the big picture, here's what we got. So you have all those excessive heat warnings, hazardous heat indexes, heat advisories, excessive heat warnings there in the Phoenix regions, but down there into Vegas, California, much of the Northwest, that's not going away with the heat anytime soon, while much of the just extreme portions of the southern ranges, especially around the coastal regions, would likely pick up some flooding rains, complements of that little area of low pressure. And then we'll also talk about another area of pressure in the Caribbean that's likely going to be getting into the southern Gulf of Mexico by the time we hit into Monday. But notice what happens further to the north. Yeah, those are the initial frost and freeze advisories potentially unloading for those northern areas of Minnesota. That tells you that second cool front is pretty potent, folks. It's actually the coldest air mass of the season that y'all felt so far this as we transition into meteorologically fall. So going into Saturday, here's the big picture. So you can see that trough really starting to develop as that upper air start to cool off, and some of that area will start to sink down to the surface, and those temperatures are going to be dropping in a big way, especially under those clearer skies allowed a radiational cooling to drop those temperatures back in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, those areas into Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and especially as this builds through the mid-Atlantic regions and dives into the Tennessee Valley and eventually heads into the southeast with those cooler anomalies. And you've got another area of high pressure that will be trailing behind this one. So again, another pocket of drier air that's going to be coming in on the backside. So yes, that's going to be able to cool off in a big way really quickly, especially as you head into the nighttime hours. And those temperature anomalies are going to be dropping fairly significant as well for September standards, with those 15 and almost 20 degrees below average temperatures. So yes, it's going to be a taste of fall nonetheless for those regions across the Ohio Valley and much of the southeast, and getting into the mid-Atlantic region. And there are some actual temperatures heading into this weekend. This is as you wake up on Sunday morning on the latest NAM. This is why we do have those initial frost and freeze advisories out, as temperatures would likely in spots drop into the 30s across these regions. So we got 30s and 40s kind of showing up on the map even as far south as Illinois. So you get that first initial, but look how far south it goes, folks. You got 59s coming in Arkansas. You've got 59s coming in at North Texas. So yeah, that is definitely the coolest temperatures they've seen so far this season. But back behind it, we do have some drier air, and that's going to be indicative as we head into the weekend. So we'll have this underneath that trough. Will bring out some precipitation and far the upper peninsula of the Great Lakes regions, as well as into New York, back into Pennsylvania, and areas into the Northeast. You'll likely get up to about a half, maybe an inch of rain in some sporadic locations. But much of the country is going to be pretty dry back behind either the heat dome that's out west, or that drier air that comes in back behind those cool shots of air. And then yes, we'll be watching that another little disturbance is likely going to get into the southern Gulf of Mexico and run into this cool front. So by the time we head into Monday, this is the secondary cool front that's already trying to develop up here in Canada. Will likely dive all the way down into the deep south and actually get into the Gulf of Mexico. And that's one of the reasons why these little disturbed areas are likely going to stay more southbound. So we've got several lemons out there we're watching for hurricane season. The more concerning one is this out here, this little this really disorganized area of low pressure out here into Jamaica would likely continue to track westbound. And there are definitely signs of some slow organization down here into the southern Gulf of Mexico. In fact, the latest EPS guidance has about a 50% probability of this trying to form into some sort of tropical entity, but it's going to run into a brick wall with that cool front that's just kind of hanging out over the Gulf of Mexico. What's likely going to happen, it's going to pick up this moisture that's going to be developing into the southern Gulf of Mexico and kind of slingshot it eastbound and spread again some additional heavier rains, especially along those coastal regions into the southeast, heading into the Florida Panhandle as we get into early next week. So if you wake up on Monday morning, this is what the second cooler shot of air is going to produce, reinforcing shot of those cooler anomalies into the 40s and 50s for much of the north central U.S., much of the Ohio Valley, the mid-Atlantic, and down here into the southeast. Those 60s spread all the way down pretty far south into Texas. So that tells you definitely some cooler air, but definitely drier air back behind it, as the heat dome doesn't really go anywhere out west. You continue to stay on the warm side. And so if we look at the precipitation next Monday, man, look at this, folks. I mean, yes, that either ridge of high pressure or back behind these cool shots of air, you've got some extremely dry air back behind it. I mean, the only game in town by then will be watching this little disturbance, whatever comes into the Gulf of Mexico that just sits there down there into the Bay of Campeche. But again, as that cool front kind of stalls out there in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, we'll have to watch this moisture spread, likely elongated along this region, spreading its additional precipitation into the state of Florida. And that's exactly what the ensemble guidance has kind of hinting at. Brown shows all the drier air back behind it, and then all the green shows all the moist, more unstable weather. So it's mainly along these coastal regions. Again, the I-20, basically essentially the I-30 corridor here, down there in the southeast, but especially into the Florida Panhandle, getting into Florida, some parts of Georgia, into the Carolinas, and the European. Again, it's pretty dry. I mean, this is over a 4-day time span next week. But so it's either the ridge of high pressure that's still going to be building out west, that really doesn't go anywhere. In fact, once these cool shots of air comes through, that ridge will be sliding eastbound. So yes, I mean, we've got a respite with these cooler shots, but we are going to be watching the warm air build back in as we spread deeper into the middle of next week. So whatever's building has been staying out there across the west will likely spread eastbound once that second shot of cooler air comes back on Wednesday. And once the winds turned around to the south, yes, drier air cools quick, but it also heats up quick. And that's exactly what's going to happen as we head into the middle of next week, is that ridge will slowly be shifting from west to east and be expanding, with the above average temperature anomalies spreading over a good part of the country by the time we get into late next week. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch me next update. Wire protect you before and after the storm.